In this podcast episode, I want to share with you some of the books that I've read in the past year that have impacted how I behave, how I think, how I act in really positive and helpful ways. Welcome to Grow With Intention, the podcast for people who want to create a life that feels good. We're going to get straight into it with book number 1, which is Corkscrew Solutions. This book is all about problem solving with a twist. I have read problem solving books before. I've read decision making books before. This one has trumped a lot of the things that I've read because it's so practical and it's so actionable. It shares this one exercise that I can share with you literally right now that you can do day to day that will immediately upgrade your life if you start doing it regularly, which is the cloud method. I've talked about this before. Essentially what you want to do is you want to get 2 options that you might be facing that you feel torn between. For example, get a new job or try to go for a promotion at my current job. Pop your 2 decisions down and then you want to write down the benefits of both of those options. So, go hard at my current job. Well, I already know the people. It's comfortable. I have a great boss. And as for option number 2, get a new job, the benefits could be learn new things, get to network with new fun people. The idea is that you then sit with those 2 options, sit with all those benefits and ask yourself, how could I get the best of both worlds here? How could I get everything that I want? What's option number 3 that I haven't thought of yet that gives me everything that I want here? The little cloud method that I just talked through, and if you're on Spotify or YouTube, I'll have the demonstration of the cloud method and how it works if you want to do it on paper. I don't know if Apple Podcasts has video. I'm sorry, you guys, but I'll make sure to have my YouTube channel linked in the show notes. This is just such an easy, simple method that you can use on a day-to-day basis that can so quickly make a difference in your life. That's why it has made this book list, because I use it often, usually without actually doing the cloud method on paper, because you can kind of do it in your head. Book number 2, this is a book that I've talked about before, and it is called Little Treatments, Big Effects, and it's by Jessica Schleider. I actually first learned about this book when I was listening to a podcast, and Jessica was sharing her story of her eating disorder history. She'd struggled with an eating disorder for a pretty long time, and one day she was in this treatment center, not for the first time, and she decided that she would push herself and she'd try one of her scary foods or hard foods. And when someone asked her oh, what made you try your hard food today? She was like, well, I'm not actually sure. I usually don't try hard foods until I'm absolutely ready, but I don't think that would have happened by itself, so I just did it anyway. And then this person was like, well, what if that's the whole thing? Just doing hard stuff instead of waiting to want to do hard stuff. And that comment stuck with her. At first, she was frustrated. She was like, way to simplify it. That's such an annoying thing to say, as we often do with simplistic advice. But then as time went by, she was like, wait a minute, this is everything. And it really changed her path completely and led her towards recovery when it came to her eating disorder, which is something that she had tried for so long to do. But it was this one tiny little minuscule comment in a passing conversation that had such an impact on her that it shaped her behavior to come. And in this book, she talks about the power of little short treatments that can really work for people in the therapeutic world, and how it's possible to change within the scope of one conversation with just one little insight that clicks and finds the right little pathway in your brain. And that resonated with me so much, because a lot of the changes that I have made have been one little moment, one little passing comment, one little experience where then I've been like, oh man, that's shifted everything. I see things differently now. And if you read this book and all it does for you is instill the belief that change is possible, that it is possible for you to switch up, to see things differently, to change your perspective within small moments, that's a huge belief for any kind of book to instill, which is why it's on this list. Let's move to the next recommendation, which is Procrastination, Decoded by Dr. David Maloney. And I've recommended this one before as well. I started this year out in such a weird little headspace. I had hired a productivity coach who was amazing. She was incredible. I have nothing but good things to say, to be so clear. But I'd hired this productivity coach to hold me super accountable. And I was like, I want to do all of this stuff and achieve all of these goals. And in the space of a month, I released my podcast, and I released it with 4 episodes all ready to go. For some reason, I felt like that was really important. And I also totally rewrote the life map, but then I wasn't super happy with how it went, which is why I did a massive update of it. I filmed a bunch of videos for my YouTube channel because I was really insistent that I get all this content up for December, which is a lot of the reasons why I haven't created December content as much this year. And that content didn't go that well. I had all this content for my intention app, etc., etc. Woe is me. I recognize how much privilege I have in my life. But alas, I was working really hard and not really seeing the results of it. So I ended up feeling really burnt out and really resistant towards doing anything. Come January, I was pooped. I wasn't particularly sad, but I just did not want to do things. And then I stumbled across this book, Procrastination, Decoded by Dr. David Maloney. And one of the big messages in it that really hit for me was you need to have unstructured time in your life. Time where you just sit back and you go, what do I feel like doing right now? Because otherwise you are going to burn yourself out. And that was something that I was not doing. Even when it came to my free time, I would be like, okay, in in free time will do this. I have to have plans, etc., etc. Whereas this approach was a bit more like just set a time and then at that time ask yourself, what do I feel like doing right now? Like follow what you feel like doing in that moment, which is something I just hadn't really given myself the privilege of doing. Such a good book for anyone who has ADHD, anyone who experiences demand avoidance, which is sort of a part of ADHD. If you've ever scored as a rebel on Gretchen Rubin's personality test, the rebel being the person who doesn't like to tell themselves what to do or to be told what to do, this book would be really good for you. If you're going through burnout, this book would be good for you. I will say it's mainly the end part of the book that I really resonated with, not so much the starting part of the book, even though that was good too. I really like a lot of David Maloney's work, and I will leave his YouTube channel down in the descriptions. The next book is The Power of Systems, and you've heard me talk about this before. I had a podcast episode called Maybe It's Not You, Maybe It's Your Systems, something along those lines, where I talked about how we all need to stop thinking so much about ourselves when things go wrong in our life or when we're not living up to our expectations. And one quote that really hit me in this book was, all solutions that focus on I only tend to increase isolation. When we're trying to solve stuff and we're just like, or maybe I need to just try harder. Maybe I just don't think I deserve it. Maybe I actually have this secret fear of success. Maybe I have a secret fear of failure. This book hammers home the idea that those little psychological quests to figure out why you are the way you are can be totally endless and useless. Now, obviously that's a really big call to make. I think that there's a nice balance, but I do think for people who are overthinkers, people who are ruminators, people who can think about themselves all day long and their faults and their failures, you probably do need to apply a book like The Power of Systems rather than endlessly thinking about yourself, why you are the way you are, the root cause of all of your issues. Because if you've ever tried to do that for like a period of longer than 6 months, you'll realize that it doesn't usually get you super far when you're an overthinker, because you might uncover the reasons for one thing, but the reasons won't actually change your behavior. You might apply some healing modalities there, but then you'll uncover another thing. And it'll kind of become this really endless cycle of self-focused thinking that often just isn't that helpful. I do believe that there's a balance here. I don't think that you should never ever think about yourself and the root causes of your issues, but it can turn into a bit of navel gazing. It can turn into a bit of self-obsession. It can turn into something that's just really unhelpful for a lot of people. And that's where this book can be helpful. All links for these books, by the way, will be down in the show notes. The next book, also one that I've recommended before, is called A Little Piece of Mind. This book is just delicious. This is the kind of book that I could read once a year, twice a year even, and continue to have insights from what I read. It really hones in on a lot of my beliefs when it comes to thoughts and feelings and how to manage your thoughts and feelings, which is you need to maybe stop managing them quite so much, because sometimes you can overmanage, and when you overmanage, things go wrong. So for example, one of the quotes in this book is, the less I try to get involved and manage my experience, the more free-flowing thought seems to become. And when we're no longer scared of our thoughts, we're at peace with any thought that shows up, and they will, because that's what they do, and it unsticks our thinking and starts to flow naturally. I read this book in full when I got it, and then I've already reread little bits of it, and every time I reread little bits of it, I'm like, I'm thinking about things fresh. I don't know what magic they put in this book, but it just hits me right every time. It is actually a book focused towards anxiety, I should say, but you can totally read it if you don't struggle with anxiety, if you just struggle with maybe the sad sometimes, or you just want to get a better grasp on how to manage or to manage less your thinking. The next book I want to talk about is The Art of Giving and Receiving. This is a book about consent and sex, but I think that it can be applied to life. And there's one quote in it I'm just going to leave you with so that you can understand the impact of this book, that I just think it's just such a beautiful idea. When we are worried about having to give too much, we become afraid to give anything at all. When we take full responsibility for our limits, we become relaxed and generous within those limits. It is backward from what we might think. The way to joy and generosity is not to push ourselves, but to own our limits. Exactly. If you're interested a little bit more in that in terms of giving too much, I created a whole podcast episode on what to do when you give too much. I'll have that linked in the show notes. The last book that I absolutely have to recommend is called The Highest Goal, The Secret That Sustains You in Every Moment. This one is a weird recommendation because there's just one concept that has really stuck with me from this book, but I have to recommend the book because this concept stuck with me and has helped me so much, which is the concept of a live with. So a live with is basically where you pick a sentence or a phrase and you live with it for a week or two. Your phrase or sentence could be something like measure twice, cut once, for example. It's like a credo, a personal principle, if you will. And I've used a few little live withs throughout my year. I'll randomly just like pick one, live with it for a week, and they truly shift how I have behaved sort of ongoing. And it's just such a like fun little mental experiment way to approach life. The book actually has every single chapter is its own little live with that you could use. It does talk about a whole bunch of other things, but I do think the core focus is a live with. Do with that what you will. Usually I would end my podcast with Recs of the Week, but this whole podcast is a bunch of Recs of the Week. If you want to grab any of these books, all the links will be in the show notes. I will be using Amazon Amazon affiliate links. Heads up, if that bothers you, you can look them up. There'll be the names there too. I appreciate you so much, and I'll see you soon.